We had a Radio Shack computer, and we ended up numbering everything, punch it up on the computer, telling me what was on it.
Known as the happiest guitar hero in rock history, Eddie Van Halen spent decades lighting up stages with jaw-dropping riffs, goofy laughs, and a smile that never seemed to fade. To fans, that grin looked untouchable, like pure joy with no cracks underneath. Eddie felt like the fun genius who made hard music feel effortless, the guy who turned every solo into a party. But behind that smile was a story far heavier than anyone expected. At 62, Eddie quietly admitted something that shocked even his closest circles. He hadn't been fully honest about what he carried inside all those years. The laughter, the jokes, the non-stop energy were real, but they were also armor. Behind that famous smile lived a private blacklist, a buried list of legendary guitar players who left him hurt, disappointed, and scarred in ways most fans never imagined. These weren't random critics or jealous outsiders throwing shade from the sidelines. These were men Eddie once admired deeply, studied obsessively, and even worshipped as heroes. These were the players who shaped his sound, pushed him forward, and made him believe in what was possible on 6 strings. But somewhere along the way, admiration turned cold. Idols became distant, peers became dismissive. Respect was replaced with silence, sarcasm, or quiet disrespect that cut far deeper than any headline ever showed. When whispers of this list finally surfaced, it sent shockwaves through the entire rock world. At the very top of that list sat the most painful name of all, Eric Clapton, the same Clapton Eddie once idolized like a blueprint for greatness. Before the fame, before the stadiums, Eddie was just a kid glued to his record player, spinning Cream albums until the grooves nearly vanished. Friends said you could walk into his room at any hour and hear Crossroads blasting on repeat like a sacred ritual. Eddie didn't just admire Clapton, he studied him. He slowed the records down, copied the bends, chased the phrasing, and tried to absorb that blues fire into his bones. Clapton wasn't just inspiration. He was the standard Eddie measured himself against. That's why what happened next hurt so bad. Then 1980 hit, and everything flipped upside down. Clapton was asked about Eddie's playing in an interview, and instead of respect or encouragement, he dropped a line that landed like a punch straight to the chest. "He's very good technically, but I don't hear much soul." That sentence didn't fade with time. It stuck like glue. People close to Eddie said his face fell when he read it. There was no explosion, no angry rant, no public meltdown, just quiet disbelief. Eddie later said, "I learned everything from him." That one line carried years of admiration crashing into disappointment. But the real damage didn't even come from the interview. The real wound happened later backstage in Los Angeles. Eddie finally got the chance to meet his hero face to face. He walked in excited, nervous, almost childlike, like a kid finally meeting Santa for real. But the moment felt wrong from the start. Clapton barely looked up. He kept checking his watch. No warmth, no greeting, no recognition of the moment Eddie had waited years for. When Eddie walked out of that room, he muttered that Clapton clearly just wanted it to be over. That moment cracked something deep inside him. The hero he'd chased since childhood suddenly felt distant, cold, and painfully human. Years later, Eddie summed it up in one brutal sentence: "I love the myth more than the man." That's why Clapton wasn't just a feud. He was the deepest cut Eddie ever carried. Then came Ritchie Blackmore, and this one didn't even need words. No insults, no interviews, no dramatic confrontations. One cold stare during their first meeting was enough to freeze the room solid. Eddie felt it instantly. That look said everything: dismissal, superiority, and zero interest in respect. Sometimes silence hits harder than noise. Blackmore didn't have to say a thing to make Eddie feel unwelcome. The tension sat heavy in the air, and Eddie never forgot it. Later moments only confirmed what that first stare already told him. This wasn't mutual respect, it was distance by design. For Eddie, these moments stacked up over time. Each one chipped away at the image he'd built of his heroes. The guitar world loved to paint rock legends as one big brotherhood, but Eddie knew better. He lived the difference between inspiration and rejection, between praise and quiet dismissal. What hurt most wasn't criticism, it was indifference. Eddie could take disagreement, competition, even rivalry. What stayed with him were the moments where respect should have been automatic, but wasn't. Those moments followed him long after the amps were unplugged. That's why this list stayed hidden for decades. Eddie wasn't trying to tear anyone down. He wasn't chasing drama. He was carrying private disappointments from public legends, wounds that didn't fit the smiling image fans expected. And when he finally let that truth slip, it changed how people saw rock history forever. Because behind the happiest guitar hero in rock history was a man who learned early that greatness doesn't always come with kindness. And sometimes the heroes you chase leave the deepest scars. Eddie walked in buzzing with real excitement, that natural spark everyone knew him for. But the moment he locked eyes with Ritchie Blackmore, the air went ice cold. Blackmore didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't even blink. Just a flat, frozen stare that screamed one thing loud and clear: "You don't belong here." Eddie later talked about that moment with pure disbelief mixed with frustration. "He just stared at me, didn't say hi, nothing," he said. That silence hit harder than any insult ever could. Eddie was open, friendly, quick with a grin, while Blackmore gave him absolutely nothing. Not a handshake, not even a flicker of respect. It felt like a professional slap to the face, and it didn't end there. At a late 70s festival, a tech casually suggested Blackmore talk guitar tone with Eddie. Blackmore didn't hesitate. He turned away and muttered sharply, "Not now. I don't have time for that kid." Eddie heard it. Everyone heard it. The embarrassment clung to him like sweat under stage lights. Then came the press moment that sealed it. Asked about Eddie's explosive style, Blackmore shrugged it off with, "He's a fine player, but too many notes." That wasn't critique. It was dismissal. The kind meant to knock someone down a rung. From that day on, Eddie's teenage admiration vanished fast. Years later, he summed it up cold and simple. Some people disrespect you with their eyes. Blackmore didn't just do it, he mastered it. Then there was Joe Perry, the rock star who acted like Eddie didn't exist. Back in 1978, Eddie thought he was finally sharing space with one of his heroes from Aerosmith. Instead, Perry walked past him backstage like air. No greeting, no nod, no acknowledgement. Eddie didn't sugarcoat it. "Joe Perry would just dismiss me with his eyes," he said. The worst moment came after sound check. Eddie approached Perry with a friendly smile, curious about the Gibson he was holding. Perry lifted his hand without even turning his head, signaling silence, and kept talking to someone else. Eddie stood there stunned. "It was like I wasn't even there," he later admitted. Years later, Perry finally praised Eddie's genius, but by then, the damage was locked in. Then came the name that cut deepest, Randy Rhoads. This tension didn't creep up, it slammed in fast. Eddie had just reshaped rock guitar when magazines started pairing his name with Randy's. A young, classically trained newcomer suddenly crowned the next big thing. That comparison hit Eddie right where it hurt most, setting off a rivalry that felt personal, competitive, and impossible to ignore. Eddie didn't pretend this one didn't get under his skin, not even a little. When comparisons with Randy Rhoads kept piling up, Eddie finally snapped on tape, his voice sharp and annoyed. "He learned everything from me." That line wasn't random, it was frustration spilling out. Randy wasn't trying to be Eddie, but every interview and fan debate forced them into an invisible duel they never asked for. Eddie felt boxed in. Randy felt buried under expectations, and their styles couldn't be more different. Eddie played on instinct and raw chaos. Randy was precision, structure, and discipline. But the industry kept throwing them into the same spotlight like it was a competition. Things took a darker turn while Randy was touring with Ozzy Osbourne. One of Randy's techs thought it would be funny to tape a small photo of Eddie under Randy's wah pedal. Every time Randy stepped down, he was literally stomping on Eddie's face. Randy laughed and left it there. The joke spread fast. When Eddie heard, something shut down inside him. Publicly, he brushed it off. Privately, it stuck like a splinter. Ozzy later added pressure by saying Randy didn't have a nice thing to say about Eddie, deepening the divide even more. Eddie felt underestimated. Randy felt compared non-stop. Neither wanted to admit the other was special, even though deep down, both knew it. Then came Tom Schulz, the mind behind Boston, and this clash exploded in public. Eddie had just finished one of his signature solos when Schulz walked on stage and launched into a near-identical run. Same phrasing, same flow, same attitude. Eddie didn't wait. He walked straight up and asked why his solo was copied. Schulz barely reacted. He shrugged and said, "It sounded good." Then he turned away like it was nothing. That was the real insult. Not the notes, but the dismissal. Later, Eddie offered a polite nod at another show. Schulz looked away and kept walking. No acknowledgement, no respect. Eddie could handle competition, but disrespect crossed the line. That's why Schulz stayed on the list. And then there was Rick Derringer, the only guitarist Eddie Van Halen ever kicked off a tour. No long build-up, no backstage politics, no drawn-out drama. Just a hard line crossed instantly, and Eddie didn't blink. What made this clash hit even harder was the history behind it. Eddie didn't just respect Derringer, he actually liked him. Long before the fame and the sold-out arenas, Eddie grew up borrowing some of Derringer's old licks, breaking them down note by note, and soaking in that loose, confident swagger he brought to the stage. Derringer represented a bridge between classic rock attitude and raw guitar muscle, and Eddie paid attention. That respect was real. But once they hit the road together, that admiration didn't last long. The breaking point came during a 1978 show that Eddie never forgot. Not because of the crowd, not because of the lights, but because of what happened next. Eddie had just finished one of those blistering solos, the kind that makes people lean forward in their seats, eyes locked, jaws dropped, waiting for the last note to land. The energy was still buzzing through the room when Derringer stepped out minutes later, and that's when it happened. Derringer launched into a section that sounded almost identical. Not inspired, not influenced, straight up familiar. Same melody, same phrasing, same feel, right in front of the same crowd that had just watched Eddie tear it up. Eddie heard it from the wings, and the look on his face said everything. He wasn't flattered, he wasn't amused, he felt robbed. To Eddie, this wasn't homage. It felt like someone lifting something personal and replaying it like it was nothing. After the show, Eddie pulled Derringer aside and spoke plainly. No yelling, no theatrics. He told him straight that tapping didn't bother him at all, but lifting his melody crossed a line. Eddie even reminded Derringer that he'd looked up to him growing up, hoping that shared history still meant something. Derringer brushed it off. He mumbled something vague about giving the audience what they wanted and walked away like the conversation didn't matter. That alone stung. But the real slap came the very next night. Derringer did it again. Same melody, same phrasing, same ending. And this time he closed it out with You Really Got Me, a song already stamped as a Van Halen signature. That was it. Eddie didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He didn't ask for a meeting. He turned to the band and crew and said Derringer was done opening for them, effective immediately. No second chances. No slow fade. Rick Derringer crossed the boundary twice, and Eddie shut the door for good. What made this moment so defining was how rare it was for Eddie to draw that kind of line. He could handle competition. He could handle inspiration. He could even handle rivalry. What he couldn't handle was disrespect wrapped in excuses. To Eddie, respect wasn't optional. It was the foundation. That's why Derringer stayed on that list. Not because he played similar notes, but because he ignored the meaning behind them. Eddie believed music carried identity, and once that identity was treated casually, the relationship was over. Now that you've heard the 6 names Eddie kept buried for decades, which one shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're reading every single one. And if you want more untold rock stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The next revelation might hit even harder.